The exploration ship Horizon's light drifted silently at the edge of a pale blue star system. Its silver hull gleamed against the darkness, and its engines whispered as if the ship itself was holding a quiet breath. Inside, the crew of 40 humans and 4 alien specialists went about their duties with practiced calm. Among them was Elliot Vance, a young human engineer with brown hair that always looked messy no matter how he tried to fix it. He was cheerful, often joking, and always ready to lighten heavy moods with a quick remark. People liked him because he had a way of making them laugh even during stressful missions. But Elliot's attention often wandered toward one person in particular, Saris, the alien navigator. She was not human, yet she carried herself with a quiet grace that caught everyone's eye. Her skin had a soft silver sheen, almost like starlight caught on water, and her large violet eyes seemed to reflect whole galaxies when she looked at someone. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her voice was calm and steady, as though every word had been chosen carefully. Saris belonged to the Lurian, a species that had only recently formed an alliance with humanity. They were known for their intelligence, long memories, and their ability to sense subtle changes in space, which made them exceptional navigators. To Elliot, she always seemed mysterious, almost unreadable, yet also kind. That evening, the crew gathered in the ship's cafeteria after a long day of charting asteroid paths. Food trays clattered, voices filled the room, and laughter bounced off the metal walls. Elliot sat at one of the long tables surrounded by a few engineers, a medic, and Saris herself. She sat with perfect posture, eating slowly, while the others talked noisily around her. Elliot, in his usual playful way, was telling a story about how he once slipped on a patch of ice back on Earth and ended up lying flat in front of an entire training class. The crew laughed, and even Saris tilted her head, which was her version of a smile. Elliot felt proud that he had managed to amuse her. Then someone from across the table shouted, "Elliot, you joke about everything. What about love, huh? You ever gonna take that seriously?" The others laughed, waiting for Elliot's answer. He grinned, leaned back in his chair, and said in a dramatic tone, "If Saris proposed, I'd say yes." The table erupted with laughter. A few clapped, some whistled, and Elliot chuckled with them. But when he looked toward Saris, the sound around him seemed to fade. She was not laughing. She was not smiling either. Instead, she had stopped moving, her violet eyes fixed on him. The silence stretched between them. Elliot's grin faltered. For a moment, it felt as though the whole cafeteria had quieted, though in truth the others were still talking and laughing. To him, only her gaze existed. He quickly waved his hands and said, "I was joking." "Just joking, you know." He laughed again, but it sounded weaker this time. Saris only blinked once, then returned to her meal without a word. The conversation around the table moved on, but Elliot could not. His mind replayed the moment over and over. Why hadn't she laughed? Had he insulted her somehow? Did her people not joke about such things? Later that night, Elliot lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. The hum of the ship's systems filled the room, but his thoughts were louder. "Maybe I said something wrong," he whispered to himself. He had never really thought about marriage, let alone with someone from another species. It had been just a silly remark, a way to make people laugh. Yet the look Saris gave him, silent, serious, almost questioning, would not leave his mind. The next day, Elliot found himself stealing glances at Saris on the bridge. She was focused on her navigation screens, hands moving gracefully across the glowing panels. Her expression never changed, calm and unreadable. Still, every time she glanced his way, Elliot felt his heart jump, as though she remembered his words as clearly as he did. During lunch, Saris surprised him by sitting closer than usual. She placed her tray beside his, though there were plenty of empty seats. Elliot felt awkward but tried to act normal. "You eat quickly," Saris observed in her soft, measured voice. Elliot nearly dropped his fork. Yeah. I guess I don't like my food getting cold." Saris tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Humans joke often. I noticed this." Elliot swallowed hard. Was she bringing up the joke from yesterday? He forced a smile. "Yeah, well, we like to laugh. Keeps things light, you know." Saris was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do humans often make jokes about promises?" That made Elliot pause. He wanted to say no, that was just me being silly, but her eyes were so steady, so direct, that he found himself stumbling. Well, sometimes, yeah." I mean, sometimes we say things just to be funny, not serious. Sirris gave a small nod, but her gaze lingered. I see. She went back to eating, but Elliot could hardly taste his food. His mind spun faster than the ship's engines. What did she mean by that? Did she take his words seriously? Did she think it was a kind of promise? The rest of the day, Elliot could not shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. Sirris stood a little closer when they worked side by side. She asked him questions about human traditions. Simple things like why people shake hands or why humans wore rings for certain events. Elliot answered clumsily, wondering if she was only curious or if she was thinking of something else entirely. That night, Elliot sat in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. The galaxy stretched endlessly before him, silent and beautiful. He thought about his joke. If she proposed, I'd say yes. It had been nothing more than a laugh, but now it echoed in his mind with a strange weight. He whispered to himself, what if she actually asked? What would I say? He didn't know the answer. Just then the doors slid open softly and Sirris entered. She stood beside him without a word, her silver skin glowing faintly in the starlight. They watched the distant stars together. Elliot's heart pounded. Finally Sirris spoke, her voice calm but firm. Elliot, when you spoke yesterday, were your words truly a joke? Elliot's mouth went dry. He turned toward her, searching her eyes, but they revealed nothing except endless patience. I don't know, he admitted quietly. Maybe I thought it was a joke. But now I'm not so sure. Sarah said nothing, only looked at him just as she had in the cafeteria. The silence stretched once more, but this time Elliot understood. It was not an empty silence. It was waiting, and he knew that this was only the beginning. The ship Horizon's light continued its journey through the quiet regions of uncharted space. Days passed in routine, scanning, charting, recording, but for Elliot Vance nothing felt routine anymore. Ever since that night on the observation deck, when Sirris had asked him whether his words were truly a joke, his heart had been restless. He could not forget her eyes. Calm, patient, but filled with a depth that unsettled him. She had not pressed for an answer, but her silence felt heavier than any question. Now, whenever he worked beside her, every word, every glance seemed loaded with meaning. When she leaned slightly closer to point out a reading on the console, Elliot found his throat dry. When she asked about human customs, he wondered whether her curiosity had a purpose he dared not imagine. One morning, while Elliot was adjusting energy relays, Sirris approached him quietly. She waited until the hum of the machinery softened before speaking. Elliot, she said, her tone as calm as ever, you told me humans sometimes joke about promises. But do humans also value truth in words? Elliot turned, wiping his hands on his uniform. Yes, we do. At least we should. Words mean something. A promise is important, Sirris tilted her head. Then when one speaks lightly about a promise, is it because they are unsure? Elliot hesitated. He wanted to answer quickly, but he knew she wasn't just making casual conversation. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes people joke because they're afraid of saying what they really feel. Sirris regarded him quietly for a moment, then nodded once and left. Elliot stood frozen, tools forgotten in his hand. His heart pounded. Later that day, the ship received an unexpected signal. The communication officer announced it on the bridge. Captain, we're picking up a distress beacon. Coordinates point to a colony world abandoned nearly 80 years ago. The captain, a tall woman named Rennick, leaned forward in her chair. Strange. That world was evacuated after resource failure. Why would there be a signal now? The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Elliot felt a flicker of excitement. A mystery meant an adventure, but it also meant danger. Prepare an away team, the captain ordered. We'll investigate. To Elliot's surprise and nervous delight, Sirris was assigned to the same team. They would travel down in a shuttle with 2 security officers and 1 medic. The descent was rough. Dust storms swept across the colony's surface, and the shuttle shook as it landed near the ruins. Through the viewport, Elliot saw broken towers, collapsed walls, and silent streets half buried in sand. As the team stepped outside, the wind tugged at their suits. The air was thin, almost unbreathable, without assistance. The buildings loomed like ghosts of a forgotten city. Signal is coming from that direction, one officer said, pointing toward a crumbled structure. They moved carefully through the ruins. Elliot walked beside Sirris, who moved with quiet grace despite the uneven ground. She scanned the area with a small device, her violet eyes narrowing. This place feels heavy, she murmured. Elliot nodded. like it's holding secrets. Inside the structure, they found the source of the beacon, an old transmitter still running, powered by a faint energy source. Elliot crouched and studied it. This thing shouldn't be working after all this time. Saris bent down beside him. Perhaps it was left for someone to find. Their hands brushed as they examined the wiring. Elliot felt a spark, not from the machine but from the closeness. He looked at her, but she was already studying the transmitter with steady focus. After some effort, Elliot managed to patch into the device. A hidden message flickered onto his screen, not just coordinates but also symbols. Saris leaned in closer, her expression tightening. "These are Lorraine markings," she whispered. Elliot blinked. "Wait, your people?" "Yes," Saris said softly. "But how?" "My kind never settled here." The others in the team gathered around, curious, but Saris remained still, staring at the symbols as though they carried weight only she could feel. Later, when the team returned to the shuttle with their findings, Elliot sat across from Saris. The hum of the engines filled the silence. Finally, he leaned forward. "Saris, what did those markings mean to you?" She met his gaze. "It means that long before my people and yours made contact, there were already paths between us. Hidden paths, records, maybe hopes," Elliot frowned. "You think humans were studying your people?" "Perhaps," Saris said. "Or perhaps they wanted to meet us even then." She paused, then asked, "Is it strange to you, Elliot, that humans often dream of unity?" Elliot thought for a moment. "No, I think it's one of our strengths. We want to connect even when it's difficult." He gave her a small smile. "Even when we joke about things we don't fully understand." Saris studied him with those deep violet eyes. Then with a calm but steady voice she asked, "Elliot, if I proposed, not as a joke but as truth, would you still say yes?" The shuttle seemed to go silent, though the engine still roared. Elliot's heart thudded. He wanted to laugh it off, to say something playful, but her eyes held him in place. "She was not joking. He began, then stopped. His mouth was dry. "Saris, I don't know. I mean, you're important to me. Very important. But this is a lot." Saris tilted her head slightly but did not look away. Humans hesitate often. "You weigh feelings like numbers. My people choose with clarity. If I asked, it would not be light." Elliot lowered his eyes. He felt a storm inside himself, fear, curiosity, hope. He had not expected this. He thought it had been only a misunderstanding of his joke. But now he realized Saris was serious. He whispered almost to himself, "Maybe I'm scared of saying yes, and scared of saying no." Saris did not press further. She simply sat back, her calm presence filling the shuttle like steady gravity. But Elliot knew the question would not disappear. Back on the horizon's light, the captain listened carefully to the team's report. She was intrigued by the Lorraine symbols, but decided the matter needed further study. For now, the vault beneath the colony would remain sealed until a larger expedition could be arranged. The crew dispersed, but Elliot's thoughts remained tangled. That night, he found himself walking again to the observation deck, where the stars spilled endlessly beyond the glass. He remembered his careless words in the cafeteria. If Saris proposed, I'd say yes. Back then it had been nothing more than a joke. Now it was no longer something he could laugh about. Saris's voice echoed in his mind. If I proposed, not as a joke, but as truth, would you still say yes? He had no answer yet. But he knew one thing for certain. Whatever path lay ahead, it would not be simple, and it would not be ordinary. For in her silence and in her question, Saris had given him something he never expected, a choice that could change both their lives, and perhaps the future of their people as well. The colony ruins were not finished with their secrets. After the first away mission, the captain authorized a second descent, this time with more equipment and specialists. What had started as a simple distress signal was now becoming something much larger. Elliot was chosen again, mostly because he had already worked on the transmitter. To his quiet excitement, Saris was also assigned to the team. The two of them walked side by side down the shuttle ramp, their boots sinking into the dusty soil. The wind had died down, leaving the ruins still and heavy like a memory frozen in time. Strange, Elliot said as he looked around. This place feels less empty than it should. Saris tilted her head, her violet eyes scanning the ruins. It remembers. Stone remembers. Silence remembers. Elliot smiled softly. You always sound like a poet. Saris turned toward him, unblinking. It is not poetry. It is truth. Elliot chuckled nervously and followed the others. The team entered the collapsed structure again, deeper this time. After hours of clearing debris and powering up old systems, they discovered something astonishing, a hidden chamber beneath the main building. Inside the chamber, faint lights flickered to life, revealing walls covered in inscriptions, not just human words but symbols, some familiar, some clearly Lurian. Elliot's eyes widened. This is impossible. Humans abandoned this place 80 years ago. How could there be your people's language here? Saris moved slowly, her fingers hovering near the carvings but never touching. These are records, not written by my people, written by yours. The chamber grew quiet as everyone tried to understand. Elliot stepped closer. The words were careful, almost reverent. They described early human explorers who had studied the stars, who believed that somewhere out there were others like themselves. One line caught his eye. The Lurian are not to be conquered, but to be met with respect. Their silence hides wisdom and their eyes hide galaxies. Elliot whispered. They wrote about you, before they even met you. Saris's expression softened, though her voice remained steady. They dreamed of us. They hoped for us. She turned toward Elliot. And for the first time he thought he saw a shimmer of emotion in her eyes. Something gentle, almost fragile. Back aboard the Horizon's light, the discovery spread quickly. Some crew members whispered excitedly about the possibility of ancient contact. Others argued it was too strange, too unlikely. For Elliot, it was personal. He could not stop thinking about the words on the wall. Humanity had seen Saris's kind not as rivals but as partners, even before real contact. It made him proud. And when he saw Saris walking quietly through the corridors, it made him want to live up to that hope. That evening, Saris found him in the maintenance bay, where he was checking a power relay. She stood silently until he noticed her, then asked, Elliot, why do humans write dreams they may never see? Elliot set down his tools. Because sometimes dreams are the only way forward. Even if we don't reach them, they guide us. Saris studied him, her silver skin catching the dim light. Your people dreamed of mine. They gave us honor, even when we were only shadows in their sky. Why? Elliot thought for a moment. Maybe because that's what humans do best. We look at the stars and imagine friends, not just strangers. We want to believe we're not alone. Her eyes lingered on him. Then softly she said, It moves me, this way of seeing. Over the next days, Elliot and Saris spent more time together. At first it was practical. They had to translate the old records. But as hours turned into evenings, their work began to feel less like duty and more like companionship. They laughed when Elliot mispronounced Lurin words. They sat in silence when the records grew too heavy. And sometimes Elliot caught Saris watching him, not coldly. Not curiously, but as though she was trying to understand something deep inside him. One night, while exploring another section of the ruins, they came across a narrow passage that collapsed behind them. Dust filled the air and the ground shook. Elliot grabbed Saris's arm. Careful, he shouted as the floor gave way beneath her. Saris slipped, her foot dangling over the edge of a broken ledge. Elliot lunged forward, catching her hand. His muscles strained as he pulled her up. For a moment they were face to face, their breaths quick, their hands clasped tightly. Got you, Elliot gasped. Saris did not move. She only looked at him, their hands still joined. Her violet eyes reflected the dim light like stars in water. Elliot's heart raced. He realized he did not want to let go. Finally, she whispered, You risked yourself without hesitation. Of course I did, Elliot said softly. I couldn't just stand by. She tilted her head slightly. This is the human way? Elliot smiled faintly. It's my way. She held his gaze a moment longer before gently pulling her hand free. But even after they returned to the others, Elliot felt the warmth of her touch lingering. Back on the ship, whispers began among the crew. They noticed how often Elliot and Saris worked side by side. They noticed how they looked at each other, how they shared quiet moments. Some teased Elliot, others just smiled knowingly. One evening in the cafeteria, a medic nudged him. Hey, Elliot, you sure that proposal joke is still a joke? Elliot flushed, but before he could answer, Saris walked past. She gave him the smallest nod. Her eyes calm and unreadable, but to Elliot, it felt like a spark. He tried to laugh it off with the others, but inside he wondered, maybe it wasn't a joke anymore. A few nights later, Elliot found himself back in the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the glass. He sat with his knees pulled up, thinking about everything, the joke, the question, the ruins, the words carved by humans long ago. He heard the doors open and knew without looking that it was Saris. She walked quietly and sat beside him. For a long time, they simply watched the stars. Then Saris spoke. Elliot, I once asked if your words were only a joke. You did not answer clearly. Elliot swallowed. I know. Saris turned toward him, her eyes steady. I will not ask again soon. But know this. In my people's way, to propose is not light. It is truth. If I ask, it will be because I believe in you. In us. Elliot felt his chest tighten. He wanted to say something clever, something safe. But the words that came out were simple and real. Saris, I don't know if I'm ready for that. But I know I want to try. I want to understand. For the first time, Saris gave a small smile. Not just a tilt of the head, not just silence, but a real, gentle smile. Then perhaps, she said softly, this is how it begins. And as they sat together beneath the endless stars, Elliot realized that whatever path lay ahead, it was no longer about jokes or silence. It was about something far greater, a bond forming between two hearts and perhaps between two species. The hidden chamber in the abandoned colony had revealed more than anyone expected. The carvings, records, and faintly glowing symbols showed a history of respect, hope, and dreams between humans and Lurayan, long before their formal alliance. But not all aboard Horizon's Light viewed the discovery the same way. The captain, Rennick, called a meeting with the senior crew. Elliot and Saris attended along with other officers. The chamber had become a symbol, but now a debate arose about who would control access to the knowledge. This vault contains advanced data about your people, Saris, the captain said. For safety, we must limit access to authorized personnel only. Human researchers will study it first. Saris's violet eyes narrowed slightly. You mean you will guard knowledge meant for both our peoples? Elliot shifted uncomfortably. He wanted to speak but was unsure. Captain, it's not just human knowledge. Saris helped us decode it. She has the right to access it. The captain shook her head. We must ensure security. It is protocol. Saris's gaze softened for a moment toward Elliot as if seeking his support. Elliot felt torn. On one hand, he respected the captain's authority. On the other, he could not ignore the injustice. The vault's contents were a bridge between their species, not a treasure for only one. After the meeting, Elliot walked with Saris along the ship's observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly, silent witnesses to their conversation. Elliot, Saris said quietly, I feel betrayed. I helped you decode the records, yet now you would limit me because of protocol? Elliot ran his hand through his hair. I don't agree with it, but what can I do? She's the captain. She makes the rules. Saris tilted her head. Humans often hesitate. You weigh loyalty against truth. But sometimes one must choose between comfort and what is right. Elliot looked at her. And if I choose what is right? Her violet eyes held his. Then you choose us, both of us, and perhaps all who could benefit from this knowledge. Elliot's heart raced. The moment felt heavier than any before. It was no longer about jokes or light words. It was about trust, courage, and fairness. He realized that the path ahead would test him, not just as an engineer or a crew member, but as a human capable of standing for what he believed. The next day, Elliot requested a private audience with the captain. He found Rennick in her office reviewing star charts. Captain, he began, I must speak about the vault. Rennick looked up, eyebrow raised. Go on. I believe Saris has equal claim to the knowledge there. And more than that, this information belongs to both our peoples. Limiting her access would betray the very trust our alliance is built on. The captain regarded him silently for a moment. And are you willing to risk your position for this belief? Elliot took a deep breath. Yes, I am. The room was quiet. The captain's expression softened slightly. Very well. You have conviction. That counts for something. It was not a full victory, but Elliot knew he had taken a step. More importantly, he had chosen honesty, fairness, and the bond between himself and Saris over personal safety or convenience. Meanwhile, Saris observed the interaction from a distance. She did not speak, but her eyes glimmered with quiet approval. Elliot could sense it without looking at her. Their silent connection had grown stronger over the past days, through shared discoveries, challenges, and quiet conversations beneath the stars. Later, they returned to the ruins to retrieve more records. As they moved through the chamber, Saris paused and placed a hand lightly on Elliot's shoulder. "You chose," she said softly, "not just words, but action. That matters more than any promise made lightly." Elliot's chest tightened. "I chose what felt right," Saris nodded. "And now the question remains. Do you choose only your people, or do you choose me?" Elliot froze. The question was no longer a hypothetical. It demanded an answer. He looked at her, the silver glow of her skin, the calm strength in her violet eyes, and realized that he had been waiting for this moment far longer than he knew. "I choose honesty, I choose fairness, and I choose you," he said finally, his voice firm despite the tremor in his heart. Saris's gaze softened. She reached out, gently holding his hand. "Then perhaps this is how it begins." Together, with trust, not fear, the rest of the team looked on, unaware of the quiet declaration unfolding in that chamber. But Elliot and Saris felt it deeply. The beginning of a bond stronger than any protocol, stronger than distance, stronger than fear. Back aboard the ship, news of Elliot's stance spread quietly. Some crew members were impressed, others worried about his boldness. But no one could deny that his choice had changed the atmosphere. There was a new respect for him, and for Saris, who now walked openly among humans without barriers. The captain, after consulting with her officers, finally allowed Saris supervised access to the vault. She still maintained security protocols, but she recognized the fairness of Elliot's argument. For Elliot, the relief was immense. But more than relief, he felt a deep joy. He had chosen not only right action, but the beginning of something extraordinary between himself and Saris. That night, Elliot found himself once again on the observation deck, alone with Saris. The stars stretched endlessly, twinkling like distant lanterns. "Elliot," Saris said, "I will not ask lightly again. Soon I may ask for a bond. Not as a test, not as protocol, but as truth. Are you ready for that?" Elliot looked at her, heart pounding. "I don't know if anyone is ever truly ready, but I do know this. I want to try. I want to understand. And I want to be honest with you always." Saris's eyes glimmered softly. She gave a small, serene nod. "Then perhaps soon words will follow and truth will guide us both." They sat together in silence, watching the stars reflect in the glass, feeling the weight of choices made and the hope of bonds yet to be fully declared. Elliot realized that the journey was no longer only about exploration of the stars. It was about exploration of the heart, and the courage it took to act upon it. For the first time, he truly understood the depth of Saris's earlier question. It was not a joke. It was a test of character, a measure of honesty, and a chance to choose beyond fear and convenience. Elliot knew the choice would shape not only their relationship, but the trust between humans and Lorraine for generations to come. And for the first time, he felt ready for the consequences of standing for what was right. The horizon's light hummed quietly as it drifted through the star-strewn void. For weeks, the crew had been busy cataloging the records discovered in the abandoned colony, and slowly the ship had transformed from a vessel of routine exploration into a center of knowledge and connection. Elliot walked the corridors with a sense of purpose he had not felt before. Each time he passed Saris, their eyes met for a brief moment, carrying a depth of understanding words could not express. Their bond had grown steadily through shared work, shared discoveries, and the quiet trust that had been forming between them since that first joke in the cafeteria. Today, however, felt different. A sense of expectation hovered in the air. Elliot sensed it in Saris's calm, measured movements and in the way she lingered near him without speaking. The captain had arranged a meeting for the crew to formally open the vault, making the records accessible to both humans and Lorraine scholars. Elliot and Saris stood side by side, overseeing the process as the rest of the team carefully decoded ancient scripts and uploaded them into the ship's archives. "Elliot," Saris whispered, her hand brushing his briefly, "this day matters, not only for knowledge but for trust between our peoples." Elliot nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I know," he said softly. "I'll be with you through it all." They watched as the data streamed onto the main terminals. Diagrams, writings, and star maps glowed across the screens. Humans and Lorraine specialists worked together, translating words that had been hidden for decades. It was a quiet revolution, one that promised cooperation and understanding across species. For Elliot, the excitement was personal as well as professional. He glanced at Saris, whose violet eyes reflected both the glow of the screens and a rare, gentle emotion. The bond between them, formed through shared challenges, had reached a new level. Once the vault was secured, the crew gathered in the observation deck to celebrate. There were quiet congratulations, shared smiles, and a sense of accomplishment that felt profound. Elliot and Saris stood at the edge watching the stars beyond the glass. Elliot felt a nervous flutter in his chest. He remembered the first time he had joked about saying yes. He remembered the long silence afterward, and the growing realization that this bond with Saris was no longer about a casual comment. It was about something real, something deep. Saris stepped closer to him. "Elliot," she said softly, "I will ask what I promised. Not lightly, not as a test, as truth. Will you accept a bond not only with me but with the path we can walk together?" Elliot's heart raced. The moment he had imagined and the moment he had quietly hoped for had arrived. He looked at her, her calm, unwavering gaze meeting his. He realized then that all the hesitation, all the small moments of doubt had led to this. "Yes," he said, his voice firm, steady, and sincere. "I will. Always yes." Saris reached out, taking both of his hands in hers. For Elliot, the touch was gentle but powerful, a promise in itself. "Then let this be the beginning," she said, and it was. The crew, though unaware of the quiet declaration between Elliot and Saris, felt the change. The ship seemed brighter somehow, the stars outside more brilliant. Humanity and Lorraean scholars continued to work together, sharing knowledge, ideas, and dreams that had once been hidden in the silence of the past. Elliot and Saris spent the evening walking through the corridors, side by side. Words were few because none were needed. Their connection had grown beyond jokes, beyond questions, into something strong and unbreakable. They paused at the observation deck once more. The stars seemed to stretch endlessly, each one a tiny beacon of possibility. "Do you think," Elliot asked softly, "this will change things for everyone?" Saris smiled faintly. "Yes, it already has. Trust spreads like light, Elliot. And now our trust is part of it." Elliot squeezed her hands. "I'm glad it's with you." Days passed, and the archives from the vault became a symbol across both species. Humans and Lorraean collaborated openly, sharing discoveries, exploring ideas, and fostering a friendship that had begun in secrecy and uncertainty. Elliot found himself walking often with Saris through the ship's corridors, teaching her human expressions, laughing at her interpretations of odd human habits, and learning more about Lorraean history from her. Every moment strengthened the bond they had chosen to trust. One evening, while checking the newly catalogued star maps, Elliot looked at her and asked quietly, "Saris, do you think this, what we have, can last?" Saris tilted her head, considering. "Trust lasts, Elliot, truth lasts. And bonds built on honesty, they last longest." Elliot smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the ship's systems. He remembered the first joke, the first silence, and now the first true acceptance. It was a journey he had never expected, yet one he would never forget. Weeks later, the horizon's light continued its exploration. New systems, new stars, and new mysteries awaited. But Elliot and Saris walked forward together, knowing that no matter what the universe held, they had chosen a bond beyond species, beyond fear, and beyond expectation. And somewhere in the quiet of the ship, under the endless galaxy, Elliot laughed softly. "Do you remember?" he said to Saris. "When I said I'd say yes if you proposed?" Saris smiled, her violet eyes glowing faintly. "I do, and now you have." "Yes," Elliot said, squeezing her hand. "Yes, always." The stars outside continued to shine, carrying the story of humanity's courage, the Lorraeans' trust, and a bond that would forever stand as proof that hearts, even across species, could choose connection over fear, honesty over hesitation, and unity over separation. For Elliot and Saris, it was the beginning of a journey that stretched beyond the known stars, beyond archives and records, into a future they would face together, one choice at a time. And in that vast, quiet galaxy, humanity had shown its brightest light, not in conquest, not in power, but in the courage to trust, to choose, and to say yes when it truly mattered.